disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, it's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. A new ballistic missile attack and a new direct threat to the US and the UK from Russia's Vladimir Putin. Accused of war crimes, the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister and his former Defence Secretary. After allegations of sexual misconduct and drug use, the man who Donald Trump wants to be his Attorney General withdraws. A colossus and a legend. Tributes from all sides for the former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, who's died at the age of 86. A young British lawyer becomes the fifth person to die after drinking shots allegedly laced with poison while on holiday in Laos. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages and our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. Western leaders have come to expect threats from Russia over war in Europe. But today, President Vladimir Putin issued perhaps his most direct warning yet. Speaking hours after his troops used a hypersonic ballistic missile in eastern Ukraine for the first time, he said the weapon could also be deployed to strike military facilities in the US and the UK. He made his unexpected national address the day after British-made Storm Shadow missiles were used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory. And as the UK's Defence Secretary warned, the front line is the most unstable it's been since the days after Moscow's invasion. Ivor Bennett has tonight's first report.
In the city of Dnipro last night, the missiles rained down. Multiple streams that kept on coming. But these weren't ordinary missiles, and the attack has taken the conflict to a whole new level. In a televised address, Vladimir Putin confirmed Russia had fired a new hypersonic medium-range ballistic missile, a response to what he called escalation from the West. At first, Moscow wouldn't comment on the reports it had fired a new missile.
Да. Алло.
Its foreign ministry spokeswoman was interrupted mid-briefing by a caller who could be heard telling her to stay quiet. But the Kremlin is silent no longer, even threatening a similar attack on any country whose weapons are being fired on Russia. That includes the UK.
We consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities. And in the event of an escalation of aggressive actions, we will respond decisively and reciprocally.
This was apparently the provocation. Ukrainian strikes on Russia's Kursk region using British Storm Shadow missiles. That's after other assaults from Kyiv involving American missiles. In an interview with Sky's Mark Austin, an accusation from Russia's ambassador to the UK.
Britain and UK is now directly involved in this war because this fighting cannot happen without without NATO staff, British staff as well.
But you are using
plans.
Chinese dual-use technology. You're using Iranian missiles. You're using Iranian drones. You're using North Korean troops. So are you saying all those countries are now directly involved too?
On that subject, I can say easily that we have plenty of mercenaries from different countries that are fighting right now on the side of Ukraine. So what's the matter?
It's that kind of reasoning Russia hopes will force the UK to back down. But there was no sign of that earlier.
The front line is now less stable than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces.
For now, Ukraine's allies are still calling the Kremlin's bluff, but the threats keep on coming. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defence Secretary Yoav Gallant are now wanted men after the International Criminal Court issued warrants for their arrest. Judges decided there were reasonable grounds to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant bore criminal responsibility for using starvation as a method of warfare by repeatedly restricting aid entering Gaza without justification and intentionally limiting or preventing medical supplies from entering the Strip. They are both accused of war crimes for intentionally directing attacks against Gaza's civilian population. Another warrant was issued for the arrest of Hamas leader Mohammed Daif for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity on October the 7th. Those charges include murder, extermination, torture and rape. Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
In northern Gaza today, they buried the dead from airstrikes overnight. Missiles reportedly hit houses near the Kamal Adwan hospital. The area has been the focus of an intense Israeli military operation for weeks to prevent Hamas regrouping. Dozens were reportedly killed. Among them, at least 4 children. Benjamin Netanyahu visited central Gaza on Tuesday and repeated his vow to eliminate Hamas. But he is now a wanted man, formally accused of war crimes. After months of consideration, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. It is a hugely significant moment in this long war and for the Israeli state. Netanyahu's office has criticised it as anti-Semitic and absurd. But it is a very serious list of accusations and the first time in the court's history that they have issued arrest warrants for the leader of a Western nation. The ICC has also issued an arrest warrant for Hamas commander Mohammed Deif, one of the masterminds behind October the 7th. Israel says they have killed Deif, but Hamas hasn't confirmed it.
This is a black day in the history of nations. The International Court of Justice in The Hague, which was established to protect humanity, has today become the enemy of humanity.
In theory, at least, Netanyahu and Gallant now face arrest if they travel to any of the 124 countries signed up to the International Criminal Court. They include the UK, Germany, Italy, France and Canada. Many have already confirmed they will comply with the court's decision.
It's not at all a symbolic act. If you're a head of state, a head of government, and you have to watch your back where you travel, there is real jeopardy in there.
The United States, however, Israel's closest ally, is not a signatory of the court. The State Department has rejected the ICC's decision, and members of the incoming Trump administration have threatened sanctions against the court.
We fundamentally reject the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israel officials. The United States has been clear that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over this matter.
Netanyahu sacked Yoav Gallant as defense minister just 2 weeks ago. They have become political enemies, but they will now forever be bound by these international arrest warrants, and the charges of war crimes will be part of their legacies, whether or not they ever face trial. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Now, he's faced allegations of sex trafficking, sexual misconduct and illegal drug use. And tonight, the man who Donald Trump wanted to appoint as America's most senior enforcement officer has withdrawn from the nomination process. Matt Gaetz said he was becoming a distraction to the incoming Trump administration. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
It was a great day. 24 hours. It is a long time in politics. Enough time, it seems, for a complete U-turn. One of Donald Trump's shock picks for a key position is down and out. And just a day after he was on Capitol Hill to hear from politicians who would ratify his appointment as America's Attorney General.
Maybe I should serve as Attorney General of the United States.
Matt Gaetz was the pick above all others, which sent eyebrows into orbit.
Abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them, if they do not come to heel.
Shut up, Gaetz. Perhaps uniquely unpopular among his peers, but more than that, a character with more than a little baggage. This federal investigation document obtained by the New York Times shows an alleged web of payments between Gaetz and others allegedly involved in sex parties between 2017 and 2020. No charges were ever brought. But behind these doors, the House Ethics Committee was also investigating sexual impropriety, drug use, and other corruption. Trump picked him for his loyalty, the man who would do his bidding.
It was a test, too. Just how much would the Republicans in there conform to Donald Trump's choices? After all, he's returning to the White House with his own criminal convictions. So what if his picks have their own baggage, too?
Well, it turns out it does matter. In a statement, Mr. Gaetz said, "There's no time to waste on a needlessly protracted Washington scuffle, thus I'll be withdrawing my name for consideration to serve as Attorney General." From Mar-a-Lago, where Donald Trump continues to select his cabinet picks, he wrote, "He was doing very well, but at the same time, I did not want it to be a distraction for the administration, for which he has much respect. Matt has a wonderful future, and I look forward to watching all of the great things he will do." With Gaetz gone, focus will now shift to other controversial picks. Fox News host Pete Hegseth is choice for Secretary of Defense. Unqualified, say critics, and accused of sexual assault too.
The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much.
As scrutiny here continues, it is back to the drawing board for Donald Trump to pick his Attorney General.
Well, Mark is live for us in Washington tonight. Mark, Matt Gaetz said that he didn't want to be a distraction, but he's not the only one. There's controversy among other nominations as well.
Yeah, that old chestnut that politicians use when they are becoming the story. He has been centre of the story over the course of the past week or so, ever since Donald Trump dropped that bombshell and suggested that he should be the man to be his top law enforcement official. And it was clear quite quickly that it wasn't just Democrats who were concerned about this choice, but Republicans as well. That's why I said in my report that it was a test, because all of these nominations are tests of Trump's of the loyalty of Trump's foot soldiers in that building there, the extent to which they will accept the choices that he makes for that inner circle in the White House. And I suppose the question tonight is, was Matt Gaetz the completely crazy one that they were never going to accept, and therefore they will accept the others, or are others a problem for them as well? You saw in my report there, Pete Hegseth. He's a man who is, so generals in the Pentagon would say, entirely unqualified for the job that Trump wants him to do. He also has his own personal baggage as well. Will he be accepted by the politicians on Capitol Hill? And then, of course, there's Tulsi Gabbard. She is the pick for the Director of National Intelligence, a person that Russian state television refers to as our girl. The argument is that she is compromised, that her views on Russia are not in line with what America's political views should be on Russia. So plenty of other picks that will be scrutinised in the days ahead for sure.
Mark, thanks very much. Now, he threw punches at protesters, was doused with ice-cold water at the Brits and made his mark as an old-school enforcer for the new Labour machine. Today, politicians from all sides paid tribute to Lord John Prescott after his death from Alzheimer's at the age of 86. He served as Deputy Prime Minister during Tony Blair's decade in power. His former boss remembered him as highly intelligent and loyal and with a sharp political instinct. Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
Pride in our record. What we promised, we delivered. Pride in the future and what we promise to do next.
A titan, a colossus and a legend. Just some of the tributes to John Prescott, a politician who pulled no punches. He was the link between Tony Blair's new Labour project and the party's more traditional roots. He saw himself as a man of the people. And yet he was known as Two Jags because he owned one as well as using a ministerial car.
A man who fought for working class ambition because he lived it. As one of the key architects of a Labour government, John achieved that rare thing. He changed people's lives.
King Charles praised Mr. Prescott's unique and indomitable character and infectious sense of humour. MP for Hull East for 40 years, Mr. Prescott stood for Labour leader in 1994, but after losing to Mr. Blair, he became his deputy. And after Labour's 1997 election victory, he became Deputy Prime Minister. But despite his achievements, he was often ridiculed for his unorthodox use of language.
When the Deputy Prime Minister said of local government last week, if you want to have a unitary, then you can have a ballot, discuss it with the people, but if you want it, fine. What exactly did he mean?
I think it's very, very clear, and I'm just surprised the Right Honourable General can't follow it.
People used to make fun of his speeches and his use of the English language, but he was an incredibly direct communicator. And even if the syntax never quite made sense, the sentiment was very powerful and made complete sense.
He was direct with journalists in Downing Street. And he once likened Peter Mandelson to a crab. During the 2001 election campaign, he punched a man who threw an egg at him. Mr. Blair reacted by saying simply, "John is John." When Mr. Blair left Downing Street in 2007, Mr. Prescott quit too.
John Lennon talked about working class heroes, and it's a very difficult term to understand and follow and to be one But I think John comes nearest to it, and I think he would like that to be his epitaph. He was a titan, he was a colossus, but he was also a working-class hero.
He left the Commons in 2010 and became a life peer. His last appearance in the House of Lords was in 2022.
People talk about the Red Wall. John Prescott was the Red Wall. You know, as Tony swept the south, John Prescott held on to the north and gave people confidence.
Married to wife Pauline for more than 60 years, John Prescott was Britain's longest-serving Deputy Prime Minister.
I don't think I could ever fill John's shoes, but I'm hoping that I continue to make him proud, which is what his last words to me were.
He'll be remembered as a firebrand and a political bruiser. He was a one-off. John Craig, Sky News.
A young British lawyer has died after drinking shots thought to be laced with a poisonous chemical while on holiday in Laos. Simone White from Orpington in Kent was one of 5 people to fall seriously ill. Authorities are now warning about the dangers of methanol, which is odourless and highly flammable and often used to make pesticides and paint thinners. Here's our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch.
Simone White was 28 years old, a British lawyer enjoying a great adventure in Southeast Asia. But she's now the 5th person to have died after allegedly drinking alcohol shots laced with deadly methanol during a holiday in Laos. Bianca Jones, who was 19 years old and from Melbourne, has also died from suspected poisoning. In Parliament, the Australian Prime Minister paid tribute.
All Australians offer them our deepest sympathy in this time of heartbreak. Bianca's trip should have been a joyous time and a source of fond memories in years to come. Memories that she should have carried with her into the long, bright future that lay ahead of her. It is beyond sad that this was not to be.
Her best friend Holly Bowles is in a critical condition in Bangkok Hospital in Thailand.
Our daughter remains in intensive care unit in critical condition. She's on life support. We'd just like to thank everyone from back home for all the support and love that we're receiving. But we'd also like for people to appreciate right now we just need privacy so we can spend as much time as we can with Holly.
They were staying here at Nana Backpackers Hostel in Vang Vieng when they fell ill.
The hostel has always given out free shots of Lao vodka to our guests as a gesture of hospitality. We got the alcohol from a trusted shop in Vang Vieng. After drinking here, the guests were sober, they looked healthy, and they went out for more drinking.
2 young Danish women and a 56-year-old American man have also died. The area is popular and known for partying, but now there's fear in the air.
Everyone here is very friendly because, like, most of the people here are backpackers, so you share a few drinks with a few people, and I think maybe some of the times you're not really watching how your drink's being made or who has your drink when you're going to the toilet.
It was a trip of a lifetime. So many have shared and can recognise, but this one came with a hidden, sudden and fateful risk. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Bangkok.
The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has admitted the UK was just hours away from running out of PPE during the COVID pandemic. He was giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, and though he maintained the NHS was not overwhelmed during the crisis, he admitted that some areas of the country were extremely close to running out of stocks of personal protective equipment.
It got extremely close, sometimes within hours. And for the people operating that PPE supply chain on the ground, it was incredibly difficult.
Police investigating the killing of Harshita Brella from Corby have released an image of her and her husband, which may be the last picture of them together before they believe he killed her. The image shows Harshita and Pankaj Lamba walking together around a boating lake in the town at 6:30 on Sunday evening. Police suspect he killed her the same night. Her body was found in a car boot in Ilford on Thursday. Police suspect Lamba has now fled abroad. Large parts of the UK are expected to see snow and strong wind this weekend during the second named storm of the winter. Storm Bert is likely to bring freezing temperatures, rain and snow on Saturday and Sunday, with flooding and travel disruption possible across much of northern England and Scotland. Exactly 50 years ago, 21 people were killed and more than 200 injured when 2 bombs exploded in 2 city centre pubs in Birmingham. Today, the families of the victims renewed their calls for a public inquiry. Our Midlands correspondent Lisa Dowd reports from a vigil held in the city.
On a bright November day, a city fell silent to remember one of its darkest times. A rose was laid for each victim of the Birmingham pub bombings.
My dad died too young. I missed out on so much, which is why we must never forget the 21 and make every effort to find out the truth about the Birmingham pub bombings.
21 people lost their lives in the city centre 50 years ago. An inquest decided that they were murdered by the IRA. 182 were also injured when the bombs exploded in 2 pubs. A third device was recovered, but West Midlands police lost it. 6 Irishmen, known as the Birmingham Six, were wrongly convicted over the attacks and freed in 1991 after 16 years in prison. No one has been convicted since. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, delivered a message from King Charles.
To see the brave strides forward that have since been made towards lasting peace and meaningful reconciliation, and the close bonds of love and friendship which now bind this city together, makes me exceptionally proud and thankful.
Relatives want to know which individuals were responsible. The victims' families say that quite rightly there have been public inquiries into the Manchester Arena bombings, the Grenfell disaster and the Salisbury poisonings, but never the Birmingham pub bombings, and they can't understand why.
Look at her. She was 18.
Julie's sister, Maxine Hamilton, was killed in the attacks.
We cannot allow murderers who continue to breathe continue to have their liberty.
The government says they'll consider requests for public inquiries as soon as possible. The families say they'll never stop fighting for those who lost their lives in the biggest unsolved mass murder in modern British history. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Birmingham.
Now to the story of a fake carer, an untrained imposter who spent 3 weeks looking after an elderly man before disappearing. As the government promises to reform the NHS, there's a drive to get people at home, treated at home or in the community. Our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, has been finding out what happens when that care falls short.
Sarah Whittaker hired a live-in carer for her 89-year-old father, David, who needs some help at home. But it was the beginning of a mystery that's left the family shocked and angry.
This was somebody with experience and qualifications in personal, intimate care.
The carer came with a glowing CV, years of experience, but the care wasn't up to scratch.
We had to teach her how to open and close the catheter and empty it. She'd never seen one before. She was just giving you pills here, there and everywhere, wasn't she?
But she just wasn't trained.
On a family walk one day, David's granddaughter takes a video. The carer, who we aren't identifying, looks panicked to be on camera and quickly ducks out of view.
And that's when we picked up the video and compared it to their photograph of her, and we realised it wasn't the same woman. And the next morning she just packed her bag and left. Who was she? And why was she hiding in our house?
Sarah and her family had been duped. The carer who should have done the job sent an untrained imposter in her place. The police were called, but to the family's disappointment, they said they would not investigate as they had limited lines of inquiry. So we tracked the real carer down.
I was there. I did the job. They don't believe and they don't want to know.
I have a photograph of that person.
And that was not me. That was what you think.
So how do I explain that?
It's so bad. Very bad, and I'm so sorry because something I've never done in my life. Because when it comes to care, I give it all.
The case of the fake carer exposes flaws in the home care system. The type of agency Sarah used to hire Tracy, so-called introductory care, isn't regulated by the Care Quality Commission, which is set up to protect people from coming to harm. David is clear. He thinks all home care agencies should be regulated.
There's no point in being responsible for the care industry if you only deal with people who are registered with you. It's quite pointless. I feel very cross about it.
Access Care, who supplied Tracy, said, "We were shocked to hear of this terrible deception and are deeply sorry for what Mr. Seal and his family have experienced. When we heard of these alarming allegations, we contacted Action Fraud and the police and commenced an urgent safeguarding review. We have strict protocols in place. However, these extremely unusual circumstances have given us cause for reflection. We are in the process of developing further security checks and procedures for families in receipt of care at home." The government says it wants to relieve pressure on the NHS by encouraging more people to be cared for at home in the community.
You've got to know who's coming into your house. And I think the introductory agency system is clearly very flawed. If the system can be played this easily, the system needs to change and be more secure.
Following our investigation, Hampshire police now say they are pursuing lines of inquiry. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, a Department of Health and Social Care spokesperson said, "Our sympathies are with David's family and friends in this deeply concerning case. A healthy NHS and social care system requires strong regulation to ensure patient and user safety. And that's why we're reforming the Care Quality Commission to make sure it is fit for purpose." Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers. In the press preview tonight, we're joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the deputy comment editor at The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. Welcome to you both. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this story on the front of The Telegraph. Its headline, Starmer supports arrest of Netanyahu. We'll be right back. this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Hello, you're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. As Russia uses a hypersonic ballistic missile in eastern Ukraine for the first time, Vladimir Putin says the weapon could also be used to strike military facilities belonging to the US and the UK. Israel's Prime Minister, his former Defence Secretary and a senior Hamas leader have been issued with arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court, accusing them of war crimes. Donald Trump's choice for Attorney General Matt Gaetz has announced he's withdrawing from consideration for the role following renewed scrutiny over sex trafficking allegations. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive, and it's time to see what is making the headlines with columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the deputy comment editor at The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. They're joining us from now all the way through till just before midnight, so thanks very much for that. So let's take a look and see what is on those front pages. Well, the Financial Times leads on the news that arrest warrants have been issued for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defence Secretary Yoav Gallant over alleged war crimes. The Guardian reports that the Israeli Prime Minister angrily rejects the International Court's war crimes allegations, branding the ICC arrest warrants anti-Semitic. Starmer supports arrest of Netanyahu, that's according to The Telegraph. And The Times warns Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain. The Eye leads with the war in Ukraine, with David Lammy vowing that the UK and France will stand firm against Putin. The death of 5 tourists in Laos, including a British lawyer, following suspected methanol poisoning from alcohol, leads the Metro. On the front of the Express, Labour hands over cash to foreign farmers as the government commits £536 million in aid for overseas agriculture projects. Ed Miliband attempts to meet Labour's climate change targets by a boiler tax proposal, according to the Mail. And Rage of Dirty Bertie is the headline on the Daily Star. It's not a sex scandal, it's Storm Bert, which is going to bring snow, heavy rain and strong winds for parts of the UK. And The Sun criticises the police after it allegedly logged a complaint about a bad haircut as a hate crime. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch with us. Well, tonight we are joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the deputy comment editor at The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. Welcome again. And let's go straight to those front pages. Steve, we're starting with you in the Financial Times. So many of the papers are leading with the ICC's ruling today. What do you think this ruling will achieve, if anything?
Well, it's a very significant moment. It's a forensic assessment. It includes a Hamas leader, as you reported, not just Netanyahu. But it means that, in theory, anyway, if Netanyahu, say, came to the United Kingdom, he would be arrested. And it has many implications, but one of them is, from the British government perspective, and Isabel's going to talk about that in a moment, but just to set that up, I can't recall a time in recent decades that a government has faced so many military and diplomatic hazardous moments as this. So Keir Starmer is a strong believer in international law and would, by instinct, want to support this. But he's got to deal with President Trump in the United States, who will probably be pro-Israel, certainly at the beginning. So how they navigate, this is one example of many on tonight's stories, these things, is a nightmare. But I think it is a significant moment and one that needs to be taken seriously and not dismissed, as Netanyahu has, this detailed forensic report as anti-Semitism.
And Annabelle, if we bring in The Telegraph, your paper, you guys have gone with Starmer supports the arrest of Netanyahu, but I suppose if we go back to the lobby briefing that this is based on, I think the Prime Minister's spokesman was really careful to couch his words. You know, he was asked questions about will he be arrested if he comes to the UK, and sort of sidestep those questions. Is it a bit of an overreach to say that Starmer supports the arrest of Netanyahu?
Certainly, he hasn't sort of come out against it in the way that the White House has, and one imagines that Netanyahu and Gallant and Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, would have hoped that he might. Look, you know, the fact that Netanyahu is not planning a trip that we know of to the UK anytime soon doesn't mean that it isn't a very alarming prospect to think that he could land in Heathrow and find himself thrown behind bars. And you know, it's obviously placed Starmer and the Labour Party in an immensely difficult situation, and what we've had as a consequence of it is a fudge. So, as you say, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister has reported that they will respect the independence of the ICC, but at the same time, the government has been very clear to set out that there's no moral equivalence between the IDF and Israel, which is a democratic nation in the Middle East, and Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, proscribed terrorist organisation. And I think that in some ways that speaks to the warrant itself, because it has been issued to Netanyahu, to Yoav Gallant, the former defence minister, but also to Dave, who was Yahya Sinwar's number 2. So from the ICC's perspective, it does very much look like moral equivalence between the actions of Israel and its, what I believe to be a just war, defending itself against an organisation made up of butchers that want to wipe the Israeli state off the planet. And so I just want, perhaps not, but were you to really try and read between the lines here, I wonder whether that's something that they're speaking to.
Does this moral equivalence weaken the ICC?
Well, hold on a second. Their role is not to make a moral judgment, which is partly a subjective issue. Their role is to look and make a judgment as to whether war crimes have been committed. And they have concluded there has been, on both sides. They say that a Hamas leader is included as well. And that's it. That's their job. And international leaders then have a right to take different views in response to it. But I think it's a serious report. I've read a summary of it, only a summary of it, but it seems to me fairly definitive and conclusive. Now, I'm not surprised Starmer and his team are equivocating at this moment because, as I say, they are entering a diplomatic minefield. I think he takes international law deadly seriously and will want to uphold it. But you then enter this issue of what you do with the United States and
they don't.
Then they're not going to abide by it.
Well, they're not members of the ICC.
No, they don't have to. They don't have to. I mean, so it's only a theoretical thing about what happens if Netanyahu comes here. He probably won't come here for in the immediate future. But how Starmer weighs up his public responses, we've only had a Downing Street briefing, is challenging. There are some things he feels strongly about, and international law is one of them.
Do you think, Annabelle, heard some Israeli supporters and Israeli commentators say that this is anti-Semitic? Do you think that the ICC's report is?
Well, as you say, there are certainly those within Israel who have made those accusations and who will feel like for some time now the ICC has sought to delegitimise Israel. And that's not just in the aftermath of October 7th, but actually precedes that, the court having been set up, of course, in 2002. And I think they will be concerned that there is this equivalence between war crimes and the sort that have been committed by Hamas and their war campaign, which they view as absolutely, relating to their very existence. You know, they are fighting for their survival and the protection of their citizens. And so, perhaps if you were, sitting in Israel, perhaps if you were a member of the IDF, you would wonder whether there was some anti-Zionism, if not anti-Semitism, at the root of this. And I think it's easy to forget, of course, that Israel does have national authorities. It has national courts which are designed to deal with those soldiers who may step out of bounds in appalling ways. And indeed, there are IDF soldiers who have been removed from duty, and have been subsequent campaigns for them to be released. But this is, let us not forget, a democratic nation that will handle the misbehaviour of soldiers if that's required, in a way that you wouldn't expect from a prescribed terrorist organisation.
But that doesn't mean, because it's a democracy, because it's responding to the horrors of October the 7th, they therefore can step aside from the judgments issued by an international court. The international court would then become completely delegitimized if it could only make judgments on certain states because they're not democratic or whatever. I think it is a judgment on the individual cases. And if you remember, after the horrors of October the 7th, both Rishi Sunak, then Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said Israel has the right to respond to this nightmare as long as it stays within international law. There was that qualification.
But then the Tories have said previously that if an arrest warrant was issued, that they would challenge it, which Labour very quickly after being elected backtracked on. But
let's just bring in the Times as we talk about this, because this is its front page is talking about the arrest angle. Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain. And I mean, this does essentially put Netanyahu in the same league as Vladimir Putin, doesn't it, in terms of him being an international pariah and not being able to travel to countries that do respect the jurisdiction of the ICC.
And in that regard, to me at least, it seems absurd. And in that regard, I do feel as though the reputation of the ICC is now very much at stake. And it's not actually just an issue for Keir Starmer. It's also the good number of ICC member states who provide arms and military assistance to Israel, and how might they respond to it. Now, we have had some come out very quickly, Canada, Belgium, I believe Italy, and say that they would arrest Netanyahu where he stepped foot on their soil. But there are others who haven't. And, one wonders if they are finding themselves in a similar quagmire to Keir Starmer.
Steve, I wonder if we look to the fourth paper, the Eye, that says, that's Lamy, the Foreign Secretary, vowing that the UK and the US will stand against Putin. That's their take on the briefing that we had, stepping away from the Middle East there. But in terms of the Middle East, just a final thought from you. Steve, do you think that Netanyahu takes much notice of what the ICC says?
Well, no, because they're going to carry on as before. But as I say, the role of the ICC is not to say, well, hold on, we will make a judgment on this group because they are undemocratic and horrendous, and we'll make a different judgment, even though we judge the actions to break international law of a democracy, say. They look at the actions and make a judgment, and they have deemed him a war criminal on that basis.
OK. Let's move away from the Middle East. We just gave you a flavour of it a moment ago, the front of the Eye, and what has happened today with Russia. Vladimir Putin's issued perhaps his most direct warning yet, used a hypersonic ballistic missile in eastern Ukraine for the first time. Has he upped the ante here, Annabelle?
Yes, I believe he has. There have been a lot of sabre-rattling over the last couple of years, just as there was actually in the run-up to Putin sending tanks across the border in February 2022. But it does feel as though this conflict is escalating quite quickly, and Putin is issuing warnings about the use of nuclear weapons more regularly and more forcefully. I suspect he's doing so from a position of complete desperation now. He is aware that Trump is coming into the White House now. Zelensky has said that the conflict may end, sooner as a consequence of that. It's not entirely clear in whose advantage he seems to think that will go. But nonetheless, it does feel as though the future of this war has the shape that it's going to take has changed enormously. And on the one hand, there were concerns going into the US elections that Trump would turn his back on Ukraine and that he would want the war to be done with as swiftly as possible. But on the other hand, Donald Trump is not the kind of man who wants to be seen to lose any war. And, you know, it's entirely possible that allowing Ukraine, Kyiv, to use Storm Shadow missiles and fire them onto Russian soil was sanctioned by Donald Trump. So, you know, there's a lot at the moment, fog of war, that we don't know. But one thing I would say is that history teaches us that when you have an authoritarian madman, or at least, you know, in an area of heightened tensions, that things can escalate very quickly and troubling.
We're going to pause there and take a break. Coming up after the break, a titan of the Labour movement, The Guardian, reports on the tribute to the former Labour Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, who's died at the age of 86.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
This may be the Premier League.
I'm not like everybody else.
But this duo have been in a league of their own. It's Haaland, a striker like no other.
Not like everybody else.
Son, Starland for Tottenham Hotspur.
Like everybody else.
That's just stunning. Wow!
Everybody else. Like everybody else. Like everybody else.
Manchester City, Tottenham on NBC and Peacock.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me now, columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and Deputy Comment Editor at The Telegraph, Annabelle Denham. And Annabelle, you've got the story in the front of the Daily Mail. Ed Miliband's apparently going to put a green tax on boilers. Why?
Well, he's revived the plans for a so-called boiler tax that were pegged by the Tories. Then they were put on ice, and now they're finding their way, into Ed Miliband. It looks like Ed Miliband's going to indeed pursue them. And what this would mean is that there would be a tax on boiler manufacturers if they fail to meet his targets for installing heat pumps. And we've had a good few years now of government trying to force heat pumps on people and setting installation targets. The Tories had an installation target, I think, of 600,000 by 2028, and last year, or in a 12-month period, they only managed to install 14,000. So it's been beset with problems. And I think the fundamental issue is that much as you may have very well-meaning officials in Whitehall deciding that there's a certain technology that will allow us to decarbonise more quickly, ultimately, if people don't want to buy them, we have the same thing with the ZEV mandate for electric vehicles, then it's very difficult to impose a tax on manufacturers because it's not really entirely their fault if the uptake isn't very high, and it'll be quite distortive.
In 10 seconds, because I disagree with the way Annabelle's been presenting that. It's a cold night tonight. Just imagine if Britain had better insulated homes, more efficiently heated. It would be fantastic, and bills for heating in this cold weather would go down. So in that negative headline, there's a route to a completely good news story about better insulated houses.
For people,
but they are more expensive.
A lot more expensive.
They don't work
not suitable for some homes. So.
We're going to park the heat pumps because we don't want to pass up this opportunity in this paper review to talk about the story that has really dominated Sky News today, and that is the passing of John Prescott. The Guardian picked a fantastic image, which, Steve, as you were just saying, really sums him up. Doesn't it?
Yeah.
You met him and knew him.
Yeah, I interviewed him many times and spoke to him often. And I'll tell you one thing, he'll be taken aback by the scale of the coverage today.
Real warmth from people for him.
Real warmth across the political spectrum, and the scale of the coverage and the implication behind the coverage that here was a really big figure of historic significance. He was modest. He had doubts about his seniority at times, but at other times he could be assertive, funny, and self-confident enough to navigate the complexities of the Blair-Brown relationship. He was very interested in policy, which some people have said in the interviews today, and I found as well. So he was a complex, interesting figure. But I tell you, he would be utterly taken aback by the scale of the coverage.
And Annabelle, he did say that in his 40 years in politics, it would be the 40 seconds of that punch that was caught on camera by Sky, I should say. That would be the part of his legacy, and we have seen that image played quite a few times today.
Yes, I think it's been on replay, that reel, which has haunted him. But at the same time, there's been a lot of other coverage, much of it very positive. I think whatever you thought of his politics, he was an admirably plain-speaking politician at a time when there's been an erosion of public trust in politics and in our leaders. And at the root of that, or in part, I think, is a seeming lack of authenticity, and I don't think you could say that that was something John Prescott lacked.
No, and hearing from Angela Rayner today as well, Steve, she said that he blazed a trail for her, and he has been enormously supportive of her, talking to her before and after she ever appeared.
And I heard one interview with her where she was asked what advice did he give him, and she just said, be yourself. And that is hard in politics. Annabelle was saying, to appear authentic is quite tricky. And he did it, she does it. I mean, there are parallels. There are big differences as well between the two. And he was powerful. He was an elected deputy. So Tony Blair had no choice but to work with him, and he worked with him very effectively.
Steve and Annabelle, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much. More from them both in the next hour, coming up on Sky News at 11, as Russia uses a hypersonic ballistic missile in eastern Ukraine for the first time. Vladimir Putin says the weapon could be used elsewhere.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation futures.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometres away. So this is a major humanitarian